This series, we're taking a little a detour from Luke, from the series on Luke, to do a summer love series. And rooting ourselves in 1 Corinthians 13, particularly the verses 4 through 8, which is the core, the crux of that. And just when you think you know that chapter inside and out, some of those very simple things like love is patient really confront you sometimes, and hopefully we'll all be confronted in a way that will drive us forward this morning. Mark is passing out blue paper, and if anyone needs a pen or a pencil or anything, Joel has some, Mark has some. I am hoping that you guys will take notes because the more patient we are with each other, the better we will be. So I don't want to just be patient, I want you to be patient now. So if you can take notes, that would be great to help out with whatever situation you are going through. And I'm just going to wait a moment until we get all those papers out, and then we'll get started. There will come a part, particularly, I think will make sense to take notes. You can take them, of course, at any point along the way. But we're almost done. Okay. All right, now I'm about to ask you guys to close your eyes. So I want to make sure Mark's seated before that, because it'd be hard to find a seat. Okay, I'm going to invite you into an alternate reality. And part of that, to close out the current reality, it helps if you close your eyes, let your mind take you to this other place. I'm going to walk you through a scenario, and I want you to be able to see it clearly with your mind's eye. So Mark is just about to sit down, and we are about to take off into this alternate reality. All right, so eyes closed. It's Wednesday night. It's the night before you're going to be evicted from your house. The bank has given you one more day to pay the mortgage. Credit card agents are camped out on the front lawn. Loan sharks have your number on speed dial. Your eyes are closed, but you're broke. You're hiding in your house. You're ducking behind the stairwell. You're hoping that they think you've already skipped town. The power in your house has been turned off, the water's disconnected, your car's been repossessed, the furniture picked up, and now the IRS agent is knocking on your door. He wants the back taxes that you've owed for several years. You can't even remember how many years it's been. And you couldn't do it, and so now he's yelling, "Open up, I know you're in there." So you do. He tells you how much you owe. You remind him that turnips can't give blood. He mentions jail, and at this point, you're thinking that a warm bed out of the reach of your creditors probably doesn't sound so bad. Just as he motions for the sheriff, his cell phone rings. It's Washington. The president wants a word with you, an explanation. And so the phone is handed. You don't have an explanation. You have no defense, only a plea for patience. Please be patient. He listens in silence. He asks to speak to the agent again. As the president speaks, the agent nods and says, "Yes, sir. Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir." And he hangs up. He looks at you and says, "I don't know who you know, but your debts are paid." And he tears up the papers, lets the pieces fall away before walking away. And so that feeling of freedom is yours. No more threat of prison, no more hounding, no more hiding. You have your life back, better than back. You are free, and you can start again. Open your eyes. You're back into reality. You guys are safe. Now we're talking about patience today, right? We're talking about patience, as Mark mentioned. That little alternate reality is a way for us to glimpse at what God has done and does for us in our lives every day. Romans 2:4 reminds us God's patience and willingness. He has patience and willingness to put up with you, as it says in the Contemporary English Version. Psalms 103:8 says, "The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love." Now, I don't know where you are in your scenarios today, where you're feeling bankrupt right now. It's usually the place in our lives where we feel a lot of fear. It's what keeps you waking up at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. It's what makes you feel restless and edgy and brittle with other people. Bankruptcy can put the best of us in a bad mood, no matter what the source of it is, and it affects our relationships with others. Especially when we're feeling at a loss. Especially when we're feeling like we don't have many choices left, like that scenario, but whatever situation we're in, it is good for us to remember who God is and what He has done and is doing in our lives today. It's good to remember to step out on the porch, so to speak, of that scenario, to step out on the porch and stare at the torn up pieces and remember God's compassion for us, to remember His deep love and His patient patience with us. Like I mentioned last week when we were starting the series on summer love, we love because He first loves us, because He first loved us. So if we want to get back to a deeper love in our relationships or in life, if we want to get better at love, we have to first sink ourselves into His love, to fill up on what He's done in our lives so we can be free to love others, to have compassion on others, to be patient with others. Now maybe financial struggles, financial issues, or debt is not where you're feeling bankrupt, is not what you're wrestling with, or where God's shown you grace and patience yet, but perhaps there are other scenarios. Maybe it's been a long while since you've reached out to God, to really listen, to be in His presence. Maybe you haven't taken time or given any effort at all for your spirit to connect. Maybe the only time you've called out God's name recently is when you're cursing about your situation. But you still have your God requests and your please help petitions. God could have put His hand up to your prayers and said, "Are you kidding me? I don't think so," after that. But He didn't. He was patient. How about those thousands of sunrises and sunsets we see every day that we don't thank Him for, right? He could have put us on beauty rations and said, "Nope, gray days for the next month." But we step out on the porch and we see that He hasn't, because He's patient with us. What about all those times you've come to church? Here, to Inspire, the place to be renewed with God's perspective, insight into His heart, to experience Him. But instead, you've experienced your cell phone. You've gained insight into your friends' lives on Facebook and renewed your fantasy football subscription. Instead, all within an hour, very productive. God could have been enough already, right? And struck your phone dead. Would have been justified, but He didn't. He doesn't, because He's patient with us. We have all the promises: get me out of this, I'll never tell another lie. Count on me to stand up for you from now on. I'm done losing my temper, God. I promise I won't be like that anymore. God has ample reason to throw up His hands and walk away, but He doesn't. Because 2 Peter 3:9 makes it clear, God is being patient with you. 1 Corinthians 13 is the love chapter. And like I said, verses 4 through 8 is the core of it. Paul leads off on verse 4. His whole exposition on love, he leads by putting patience first. I believe Paul makes a writer's choice here. He chooses to start explaining the depths of love by putting patience first. Before kindness, before courtesy and forgiveness, his big opening is love is patient. First impressions are important. They make impact, and I believe he wanted patience to open people's eyes wide about what love is really about. Love is patient. The Greek word used for patience in this context is a very descriptive one. Figuratively, it means taking a long time to boil. Now, when you're boiling a pot of water, what determines how fast it will boil or not, aside from the pot itself? The heat, or the altitude. Okay, well, we're going to bring us down to norm. The heat. If the flame is high, it's going to boil faster. If it's low, it's going to take a longer time to boil. It's a helpful clarification because he's saying that patience keeps the burner down. Patience isn't naive. It doesn't ignore unhealthy behavior. It just keeps the flame low. It waits. It listens. It's slow to boil. This is how God clearly treats us over and over again. And according to Jesus, this is how we should treat others. Matthew 18. He tells a parable. You know the parable. It's about the king who decides to settle his accounts with his debtors, right? His bookkeeper is looking over the books. Service is a guy who owes not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of dollars. So the king quickly declares that the man, his wife, and kids are to be sold, which is typical then, to pay the debt. Because of his inability to pay, the man is about to lose everything and everyone dear to him. It's no wonder in Matthew 18 that it says, the man fell down before the king and begged him, "Oh, sir, be patient with me and I will pay it all." Then the king was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. Now the word patience makes this surprise appearance here in this verse. The debtor doesn't plead for mercy or forgiveness. He pleads for patience. And it's interesting to note that Jesus uses this word twice in this passage, in this story, and never again. And as a matter of fact, the word patience never again shows up in the Gospels, in any of the Gospels. Only in this story. And so I wonder perhaps if he uses it for this one occasion to make the one point we're going to talk about, perhaps it's like a highlighter showing that patience is far more than just a virtue for long lines and slow waiters. It is, I love how Max Lucado put this, patience is the red carpet upon which God's grace approaches us. Is that good? It is the red carpet upon which God's grace approaches us. And just a little preemptive secret, it is the red carpet upon which we extend grace to others. God comes through us to others on the carpet of patience. Without patience, there would be no mercy. Without patience, there would be no forgiveness. There must be, the one, patience must be present for the full effect and possibility of the others. You cannot have one without the other. But then the story goes on. It says the king was patient, and the man with a multi-million-dollar debt was forgiven. Then it takes a left turn. The freshly forgiven man, what does he do? He makes a beeline from the courthouse to the suburbs. He searches out a guy who owes him some money. And Matthew 18 goes on and says, but when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient, and I will pay it, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and jailed until the debt could be paid in full. You can imagine the king. He was stunned. Is this even possible? How could he be so impatient? The ink on the canceled checks is not even dry yet. You'd expect perhaps a little Mother Teresa-ness out of him. You'd think that the person who had been forgiven so much would love then so much. But he didn't. And his lack of love led to this very costly mistake. It goes on. The unforgiving servant is called back to the castle, and the king says, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison until he had paid every penny. The king's patience made no difference in this man's life. The servant wasn't stunned by his royal grace. He wasn't deeply moved or appreciative. He was simply relieved he hadn't been caught at first, and then he was relieved he wasn't punished. He was given much patience, but he gave none, which makes you wonder, did he actually understand the tremendous gift he was given? Which makes the question come, do we understand the tremendous gift we've been given? We read about love, we read about patience, we talk about it, but have we fully let it permeate every part of us, our heart, our mind, our spirit, our words? Have we really fully grasped how beautiful it is of what God has done and does for us? How lucky and blessed we are. Jesus makes it clear that the proof that we have gotten it is in our patience to others. Patience deeply received results in patience freely offered. But the patience that doesn't sink in does not become a part of us, leads to many problems, not the least of which is prison, which is what we just read about in a story. Now, we can be sitting here thinking, well, thank goodness that was a parable, that, the impatient ones of us, we don't get thrown into prison. But is that true? Think about when you have an inflexible spirit. Think about when your focus is so self-absorbed. What about people who are ungrateful or lacking generosity towards others in their actions or their spirit? It imprisons the soul. It imprisons relationships. It gets them stuck just as much as thick walls and iron bars. Impatience affects relationships. We know that, right? But what may not be as clear when we're in the midst of our impatience and frustration is that it is us, the impatient ones, that will experience the biggest brunt of negativity. Pain of impatience starts within us. The negative emotions of impatience resides first within us. It comes from our own beings. It is that negative emotion that rises up and takes over inside of us before it spills out. And this is important for us to realize because contrary to what we think, and we typically will automatically, when we're impatient with something, when we're frustrated with something, we think the release and the freedom from this tempest within us will come when others change. And so we attempt to change others. If they would change their behavior, then I wouldn't experience this. If they would change their behavior, then I wouldn't be so impatient. But impatience is our response to their behavior. Our response. Therefore, correcting the negative impact of impatience only happens by working on ourselves, because that's the source of the tempest. When we learn to manage our own emotions so they don't take over and negatively impact us or our relationships, that's when death can be overcome and life can come back. Now we have to understand this important distinction. I want you to pay attention to this. The behaviors of others very, very well may need to change. That may not be in question. The situation that you're in, that you feel that impatience with, that you feel that frustration with, may absolutely need to change. But that's a separate issue that has to be dealt with. It is not our impatience that is going to change the situation. It is not our impatience that's going to change the person or the behavior. It's only going to make things worse. And it's going to harm you and your relationship. So the focus has to shift from blaming them or the situation for your losing it to how can I replace my impatience with patience? How can I help create a more life-producing environment that will help foster healthy change to occur? Do you understand the distinction? When we're blazing saddles, when we are tempest storms inside of us, just so frustrated, we don't see that distinction. We automatically put the blame on the source. That's the source out there. But we have to take responsibility here. It is a thankful thing that when we're dealing with God, when we talk about God, He does not just demand patience from us. He doesn't say, this is who I am, and this is who you need to be, so do it, be it. He is patient with us. How does He go about inspiring us and drawing us to a better place? He invites us to walk with Him. As I've read this passage so many times, I'm going to keep reading it because there's such beauty here. He invites us, as in Matthew 11 says, to watch and learn the unforced rhythms of His grace so that we will learn to really live. He invites us to follow Him so we will have abundant life. And then Jesus goes further. He promises, if you want to learn patience, if you want this, if you want to live like I do, I will supply it in you. I will give it to you. I will produce it within you. I will do the work in you, weaving and creating a new spirit within you if you let me. I will make patience bud and blossom and bloom in your heart and mind and soul and spirit. Galatians 5:22 makes the statement, the promise, the truth. The Spirit, not you, not me, the Spirit produces the fruit of love, of joy, of peace, of patience. Ask and it will be given, Jesus says in Matthew. This is one of those requests. When we were at the prayer circle a couple weeks ago, George said we were talking about some requests we make of God that He will always say yes to. And this is one of them. We pray this prayer, God, let your Spirit give me patience. He will say yes to that request. And then as George says, we just might not like the methods He chooses to use in order to grow that patience or that fruit. But if we persevere in hanging on and trust Him anyway, it will be done. Trust, trust, trust. When you find yourselves in patience building workshops, patience building workshops. Those are your relationship challenges. When you are in the midst of a relationship challenge, you realize you have been enrolled in a patience building workshop. When you are in a limited work environment, you have been enrolled. When you are in unavoidable I-4 traffic, you have been enrolled in a patient building workshop. Your tight schedule, annoying people, difficult situations are all workshops to build your patience. All of us can think of one or two that we're in right now, right? We know where we're enrolled. And every single one of those that we are in the midst of gives us lab time experience, right? Real world experience to practice those truths God gives us, to build our patience muscles, to experiment with strategies, and to root ourselves again and again in the soil of His love and His strength and His patience. Well, hopefully you have your papers ready, because we're about ready to get some practical, how does it get produced in us, wisdom. I believe God uses people who have walked these paths before us, experts in psychology and behavior, inspiration. And as 2 Corinthians 1 said, they who have been comforted provide comfort to others. And so we can tap into some of their wisdom and knowledge. Before I list some of these practical wisdom steps, though, I think first we have to understand the culture in which we are, our cultural environment in which we live and move right now, and how it affects us. If you have a plant and you want to grow that plant, it's important to know if it's going to grow in a greenhouse or if it's going to grow in the open soil. Is it going to grow in a pot, or is it going to grow up a wall? All of that, the environment that it's going to grow in, affects your expectations, right? Mark touched on this at the very beginning. We live in an environment, our world today is a very much hurry up, I want it now kind of world, right? Patience, along with endurance and perseverance, are getting harder to come by within ourselves and with other people. When we constantly operate in our world, especially in America, when we constantly operate at the speed of light for meals, or for purchasing products online, or scheduling someone to come fix your TV, the tolerance of waiting is slim and shrinking. I know you all have examples of this. Just for me, a couple of weeks ago, I was trying to schedule a handyman, and the moment I found out that he wanted to schedule for a week out, I moved on to someone else, right? You go on Amazon, you go to order a product. If you can't get the product in 1 to 3 days, you look for a different seller, right? And what about if you're seated at a table at a restaurant? You're seated at a table for 5 minutes and you haven't had the waiter come by to wait on you yet. You start to feel that antsy impatience creeping up. 5 minutes without a waiter stopping by. Quickly fading are the days where it feels reasonable to wait. When I was packing for my most recent move, I came across this little box. Literally, it was like that big. This little box, and this deep in this box of other treasures. I came across this little box, and I didn't even realize that I kept it. But this little box had changed my world back in 1976. 1976. It was so fun when I saw it. Here's a story. I was 6 years old, living in Montana, right? And I wanted a playhouse so bad. I longed for them. I pined after them. I stalked them in my neighborhood. I was determined somehow, some way, I would have a playhouse. And so when Christmas morning came, I received instead this little box. And I thought, what's up? How does my playhouse fit in this box? Well, I opened it up, and what I found was this little picture of a log cabin. I found a $20 bill, and I found a promise from my parents that after 6 monthly payments, I would have my beloved playhouse. And you know what? I couldn't have been more thrilled. Sure, I wish it could have been just right there, right then. But for me, even at 6 years old, it was more than reasonable to wait for something so worthy. Can you imagine doing that today? Can you imagine doing that with kids? Can you imagine that doing for yourself? Putting it on a 6-month wait. The environment in which we are immersed affects us. And the instant gratification demands and expectations that we have with the most benign elements of everyday life, meals, products, TV shows, it imprints us. And it creates patterns of expectations that the same will be true with even the more foundational and truly worthwhile aspects of life, like personal growth, God working in a situation, our relationships. We want, expect, and are primed daily for change now, for results now, when the reality is that things of real worth, value, and importance take time, and they need time. I was thinking even fine dining restaurants get this. They understand the dissonance that we have with this. Have you been to a fine dining restaurant where you see printed on their menu a disclaimer that reads something to the effect of, "Please be patient as your food is being made to order, and the quality you will receive requires additional time." Even some mom and pop Italian restaurants who cook their stuff from scratch will put this disclaimer on their menus. I was thinking about this as I was writing. I was thinking perhaps it would be helpful if we had those labels on ourselves and on our relationships. Please read, "I am worth the time and patience." And let me heed and read your label too. Goals of greatest worth and importance, relationships of deepest connection and lasting joy require time and patience to develop, grow, and become the beautiful all that's possible. So with that background, realizing that we are up against some heavy-duty cultural expectations, there are still some wise, practical tips to how to grow in our patience. So number 1, ask God. This is one you return to every day, a couple times a day, and sometimes every moment. Ask God for the patience you need. Connect with the power source, the personification of patience itself. Ask God. Do you need another pen? If anyone can get, yeah, here we go. Number 2, sleep. That's it. Get your sleep. It's a simple equation. The less you sleep, the more impatient you get. The more you sleep, the less impatient you get. Make sure you're getting enough rest. Number 3, find a slow hobby. And I'm serious about this one. To build your patience muscles, practice intentional slowing down. Yoga, gardening, painting, walking, reading. Find something that you will choose to slow down with. Now, you can do all of those fast. You could do all of those just slamming them. But the point is to choose to experience quality over quantity of accomplishment. When we slow down, when we choose to slow down, we reset our body rhythms and we increase our creativity and our mindfulness, and therefore our patience. Along these same lines, I had a secretary one time who had a huge stress issue, like she would get stressed out all the time. Her doctor, she went to the doctor for it, and he told her one of the strategies he wanted her to do to reduce her stress was to intentionally put herself in the slow grocery lines. Don't look for the fastest, shortest one. Find the longest one and stand in that one. When you're in traffic, intentionally take the slow lane, not the fast one. What does this do? It reframes, it changes the perspective. It says, I'm not a victim to what's going on. I am choosing this so I can slow down. And what do you do in those slowing down times? You can notice the world around you. You can have a conversation with God. You can breathe and practice awareness. Number 4, in the midst of it, this is so easy to say, don't react. Distract. And what does that mean? You're in a line, okay? You haven't chosen to not be a victim, so you're a victim. You're in a line. And the situation is brewing. You can feel it. When you feel that knot rising, focus on something else. Shift gears. Walk away if you can. Distract yourself. Talk with God. Sleep on it if you can. If you can't, then let it shift in your mind. When the negative emotions start to rise, let rise higher your request to God to help you shift, to bring life instead of death. If you feel yourself rising in those negative emotions, don't stay in the situation. If at all possible, step away. Do not let it escalate, because it will. If you just let those go unchecked, it will escalate and it will only make matters worse, as we all know so well. Number 5, practice gratitude. How does this help us slow down? Well, mystics and spiritual gurus through the centuries are notorious for having this spirit of gratitude in them. When they face the thorns in the flesh, situations, the thorns in the flesh, people that are in their lives, they are grateful. They choose gratitude for the opportunity to grow. They look at this person and they think, if it wasn't for you, how could I have ever learned to be patient? If it wasn't for you, thorn in my flesh, how could I ever have learned to love? How could I ever have learned to be flexible? How could I ever have learned forgiveness? Not snarky, but sincerely. A spirit of gratitude. Gratitude for the things about this person or this day or your life. Number six, think in terms of could, not should or ought to. When you find yourself using should or ought to, you should do this. Whether you're talking to yourself, or you're talking to another person, or when you're thinking about the situation, it should go like this. When you're demanding that of yourself, as soon as it is possible, shift to could. Consider possibilities you could pursue to solve the problem or work through the challenge. Focus on things you can do rather than on what is not working. Success is empowered. Success and effectiveness are empowered when considering possibilities rather than focusing on the problems. When we consider what patience does when we employ it, patience really can be the hero in our battles. It helps us to put on glasses to see better, not rose-colored glasses that ignore the issues, not dark shade glasses of despair, but it helps us to see possibilities because it takes the time. Patience is what takes the time and dedicates the energy and wants to see. Patience is hope. Patience is hope. It's the readiness to endure the present and the expectation that tomorrow will offer more than today. Number 7, celebrate little wins. Break down your larger hope, your larger goal into little wins and celebrate them. For instance, if losing weight is your goal, break it down to, hey, you worked out today. That needs to be celebrated. If you ate a healthy meal, yay, celebrate it somehow. Don't go eat cake and ice cream to celebrate, but celebrate it somehow. Little wins that you focus on lead up to the big successes, but also when you fail, when impatience creeps in, it helps you to not lose out on the big picture. Now these next two are pretty key. 8 and 9. Know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Right? Know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Know when to hold them. This is when you remind yourself, when you're in the midst of a very yucky situation. Somehow you step away, you seek God again and again, but you remind yourself of why you're in the situation in the first place. What are the bigger whys that you are there? For instance, you're in this obnoxiously long grocery line and you're running tight on your schedule. Reframe by saying, okay, I'm here because I'm going to make this amazing meal when I get home. I'm here because my friends are coming over and we're going to have a great time together. So I'm going to endure this little inconvenience for the greater good of what's coming. In a relationship, it's the same thing. Why? What's the bigger reason that you're here? Your shared dreams and values? Do you really enjoy the company of the one you're with? Do they get you most of the time? How do we focus on that, the more foundational reasons? When we can focus on the bigger why, it helps us to endure the challenging times. It reminds us the small prices we sometimes pay for the bigger rewards. And number 9, know when to fold them. Know when to fold them. It's important that you figure out what your boundaries are, what your lines and your limits are, whether it's in regard to a job, a situation, or a relationship. The lines, the limits, the boundaries of your abilities. What are you really capable of doing, you and God, with your abilities, your values? Figure these things out. If boundary lines and values that you hold as of utmost importance keep getting stepped on, keep getting ignored or crossed, and if there's repeatedly, consistently no shared solution-finding efforts of trying, it may be time to fold them. If you are limited between you and the other person and your abilities on how you communicate or how you relate, or if you and the situation at work or the project, whatever it may be, there may come a time where it's time to concede that you cannot fix it on your own. And you may need to get outside help, or it may be time to close that chapter. So how do you know? How do you know when enough is enough? Ultimately, and let me make this statement before I go on, ultimately it comes down to you and God making this decision. You and God, ultimately, only you can answer this when is enough as you keep in step with God's Spirit, and that's the key. Keep in touch with God's Spirit within you, on you, seeking Him, following Him. There is no one else that can answer that or do that for you. So that's imperative. Again, whether it's your job, a situation you're involved in, a relationship. So of course, you go back through these steps. You get with God over and over every day, every moment. You don't let go of His hand. And like we talked about culture, you resist the knee-jerk comfort of cultural permission to just move on. Resist that knee-jerk comfort of cultural permission to just move on. Hey, things aren't working, turning around fast enough, taking too much effort, then just quit. Resist this, especially with weightier matters. We have to remember always goals and relationships of greatest worth are only accomplished, only built with time and patience. If you value it, give it time and effort it deserves. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. Because that being said, there are times when patience sometimes needs to have a limit. What I mean by that is if it goes too far in harming boundaries or respect or value, patience, your own patience, can become a cover for cowardice. Let that sink in for a second. How do you know when enough is enough? So I'm going to give you a couple signs of things to consider when you're in a situation to take to God or to those that care deeply about you. So if a sign would be to consider if you are consistently experiencing more frustration than reward. You are consistently experiencing more frustration than reward. Now, with any situation, in any relationship, any situation, you have to take the bad with the good. There is always going, nothing's perfect. But if your experience is overwhelmingly negative for a long period of time, sometimes that means radical change is needed. Number 2, even with help, if you can no longer envision a possible solution or continuing this way. If after being loving and patient and trying extensively to resolve the issues, you still have no confidence that things will change, it may be a sign. Maybe you've been promised a promotion for years and nothing's changing. Maybe you're waiting on others to change their habits when it's really the last thing they want to do, or they aren't joining you in the efforts to resolve. It may be time. Number 3, if spending time on this keeps you from more rewarding endeavors, as in with a job, or it seriously damages your well-being. So in relation to a job or a situation, consider, do you think you could achieve a better life for yourself if you were to fold them and move on? Evaluate it. In a relationship, it's a huge red flag if your current situation is taking a serious toll on your mental and physical health. No matter how patient you are, if it's toxic, it will kill. Does your partner or your client or your boss or your friend respect you, share your values, and appreciate your worth? It's not okay to lose all your hair or start drinking at 10 a.m. to cope. It's not healthy. Number 4, if you're staying for the wrong reasons. Okay, if your decision to stay is based more on fear than faith, then it may be for the wrong reasons. Are you staying in this job or in this situation because you're afraid to hurt someone's feelings? Are you afraid of the pain or that you won't make it elsewhere? Are you staying solely out of a sense of responsibility? Number 5, listen to your wise, godly, and people of integrity, friends of integrity. If these friends are consistently advising a certain action in your life. Now, while others' advice alone is not what you base your decision on, however, oftentimes, wise, godly friends of integrity want the best for you. And they may see something going on in your life that you need to do something about more clearly than you're able to see yourself. Now, you may be thinking, okay, check, check, check. It's time to quit my job. It's time to change my education path. It's time to end my relationship. And before you do that, I want to make sure that you're checking off these other things. Make sure that you've identified the real cause of your unhappiness. If you're having a series of weeks or months of bad days, of lack of sleep, if that's the issue, or there's some other cause of your unhappiness that can influence your decision, make sure the real issues are identified before proceeding. Give it a chance. If you're about ready to quit, take a breath. give it a chance. Many things, as we've mentioned, require time to work it out. If you just started a job, the newness of it can overwhelm you. If you're in a creative field, often it's normal for your work to disappoint you. It doesn't mean it's time to move on. Sometimes you just got to fight your way through it because things of quality take time. And finally, try other solutions. Try several solutions before you fold them. If you and your significant other are always fighting over the same things, seriously put effort to look at the situation from his perspective or her perspective. Find a different way to communicate. Read a book on the subject. Seek help from a trusted friend. Get a counselor or a therapist. Be willing to do whatever it takes for the sake of the greater reward that can only come with patience, commitment, and time. Love is patient. Love is patient. God sets an example for us every single day. I was reading the words of Reckless Love, that song we sang today, the Reckless Love, and I'm sitting here thinking about this love is patient and God is love and I'm like, how far from that description of love am I? Or people in our lives. Only God has that amazing amount of love. But rather than beating ourselves up, we can look at that as hope and say, he is a God that will knock down mountains, that will tear down walls, that will do whatever it takes to connect with us, to get us, to make us secure, to help us move forward. That love is a reckless love. I want to have that kind of love. And we have a God who says, I will give you that kind of love. Step by step as you walk with me. You can get impatient. I want patience now. As Mark said this morning, God says, great. Right now, get with me. And that's the first step. And that's the step you need to take day after day after day. I want to close with Romans 12, 1 and 2. In the Message Bible, I love this passage, and think about this as it relates to love. Love is patient. Romans 12 says, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, you're eating, you're going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture, the go, go, go now culture that you fit into without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you and develops well-formed maturity, love, patience in you.
Amen.
We love because he first loved us.
Amen.
Thank you so much for giving us balance and perspective on patience. And may we take what we wrote down on paper today and not just end up in the recycle when we get home. Let's just really reflect on them and study how we can embrace these strategies in our lives as we can experience the patience of God. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you so much for this day. We thank you for the message that we heard. Love is patient, and love is you. So, Father, our heart's desire is to be more like you. So, Father, teach us how to be patient, how we can have that healthy patience in our lives. Go with us now. Guide us and direct us. In Jesus' name. Amen. Be blessed. Remember, circle next Saturday afternoon, town hall, right after church. and then game night next Saturday night. Blessings.
My weakest moment.